Maine pride.
Such a beautiful time of year to be in Maine too.
It's not a bad time to be in Maine. Wednesday's supposed to be 95.
Oh,
Ouch.
I know.
That's
So
actually, that's a lot.
that's up there.
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's funny. I lived in Massachusetts, so now, I live in North Carolina, so there's no such thing as like an air conditioner. Like everywhere is just air conditioned, period. But,
Right.
back home, we were lucky to have like one in a window in the bedroom. And
Yeah,
so,
we have one in the window.
yeah, 95 degrees that's tough.
Uh, I'm actually in southern Worcester County myself at the moment, and good old 80 degrees.
Yeah, I grew up outside of Worcester.
Uh,
So you know it well.
Yes.
We're almost to 4 o'clock. We want to make sure that people have a chance to get in. But preview, wondering if you might be willing to read something out loud from one of your books. Anything you want. It's just so fun to hear it in the author's own voice.
I'll
But
try.
you can say no.
What if I read the first page of book 3?
Yes, that would be excellent if you would
Okay.
read first page of book 3.
Okay, I could do that.
And then we've got a ton of questions, but I'm going to let you start with just sharing whatever you want to share with the fans at PortCon.
Okay.
Okay.
No, feel free. Throw whatever questions you want at me. I'm comfortable.
Okay.
also,
Okay,
I want
good.
to pass along Discord says hello.
I love my Discord people. They're so awesome. I am the luckiest writer in the world. I hope every author has a chance to have readers like I do. They're just every day they amaze me. Every day.
They have sent some questions for you. So
Yep. Some of these questions are coming live from Discord.
And dangerous too. Dangerous questions.
don't
know
worry.
that.
I have
We've-
censored a couple of them.
Yeah, we have filtered.
It's like I have an archivist, Michelle, and she's like, you've got to start writing down things you can't talk about because you just give things away. So,
Oh,
well, when you know what happens over the course of all 9 novels, it's hard not to slip some breadcrumbs out there. But I've learned that the Discord people take that breadcrumb and make the entire pie. They take all the breadcrumbs together and they literally are able to put a really nice blueprint together of where I'm going. So I'm trying to be sneakier.
well, I will say Krita is on the road at the moment. So
She's amazing.
Krita is amazing. Krita is how I actually found out about you. So
Excellent.
but you're writing full time at this point, right?
No, I have a day job. I love
You
my day job, actually. I work for the University of North Carolina system in the president's office. I work with all 17 campuses in North Carolina.
Wow.
I love it. I love working with higher ed. It's worthwhile.
That's great. So when do you
But
write?
but
Nighttime? Weekend?
tell me about it. That's finding the balance for any of you who are a writer know exactly what I'm talking about. Finding time to write, finding the motivation and the energy. But luckily, that's what I'm saying. My readers keep me going every
Yeah.
day. Something happens to motivate me. A drawing, a picture of a horse named after one of my characters. I absolutely love Little Quinn the horse. But just everything. If something happens every day to just inspire me to sit in front of the computer. So I'm lucky.
Well, one of our questions we can jump ahead to it was really about your thoughts on fan art and how you engage with it and how it comes to you, and any thoughts on fan art
Oh yeah.
depiction of your characters.
Yeah, so fan art is a very specific category. Fan writing is something a little bit different. I have different feelings about that because I never want to put myself in his position where I read someone's writing and it mimics something I'm going to do. And it creates this boundary issue of like, where did the idea come from? So I never read fan writing, but I love fan art more than anything. I'm just always amazed that you share something creative with the world, it inspires other people and they create more creativity, and then it just like snowballs from there. And it creates a community, it creates good feelings, it creates support. People chime in and they talk about how impressed they are with the other's work, and it's just one big circle of good feelings. I mean, it's amazing. And I do specifically try not to over describe my characters because I want people to see what they want to see in the characters. If they, like no 2 images of Rune look the same in character art, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, that doesn't bother me. Sometimes Brand has a beard and sometimes doesn't, though I've been boxed into a promise to make sure that there are going to be some beards going on in novel 4. For some of the fan artists, they've asked me to do that, but I love fan art. I just love the creativity. I love that I inspire other people. It's humbling how much fan art I have. I have a whole page of it on my website, and that's just from the first year. I've got like 2 more years of stuff to catch up on, and we're trying to work out a way of getting it loaded that still gives credit to the person who created it and making it clear that it's their work and their rights. I'm very protective of their rights. I want to make sure I don't do something which exposes them to being losing control of their artwork online. But I love demonstrating it and showing it to people because it's just I don't know, it's just amazing and touching and humbling to see all of it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, why don't we let you start? You've already given us some answers, but how would you like to start? What would you like to tell us about yourself and what you've written so far and what's coming next?
I am one way or the other, I've wanted to be a writer from my entire life. I don't remember ever wanting to do anything but be a writer from the very, very beginning. And off and on, I created ideas and stories, wound up in a drawer, did a chapter, never went anywhere for, years. But I took notes constantly. And all the notes seemed to lead towards urban fantasy. And at some point, my day job got settled down. I really, I was comfortable. I had more time to write, and I was in a writing group, and their feedback was very, very good. So it got to the point where people are asking me not like, are you going to send it out, but why haven't you sent it out yet?
Yeah.
So finally, I decided to. I did a few practice novels. Finally, invested my time in the story now known as the Tarot sequence, and it's more or less it's a modern day urban fantasy that reimagines the world with Atlantis in it. Atlantis has always existed. It revealed itself to the world in the 60s when human technologies was beginning to pierce the illusions that had kept it hidden. And in this modern world, the story focuses on the city itself and a fallen prince within the city called Rune St. John. And the entire power center is in the city is based on the major arcana of a tarot deck. And the major arcana of tarot decks are archetypes, kind of based on human appetites and human behaviors, like the Hanged Man, justice, strength, the sun, the moon, big things in what it means to be human, either around us or within us. And my character is the fallen prince of the Sun Court, which was destroyed 20 years ago, and he's slowly rebuilding. And it's a novel that features heavily a lot of LGBT plus characters. It favors a lot of gallows humor when it comes to things are always going wrong, but I try to find the levity in the situation with the characters who are really close and they bonded well together. That found family element of making a family when you've lost one, and rebuilding them filled with people who will support you and love you. That's what I set out to do. And about 3 years ago now, I sent out my novel, got an agent, got a publishing deal, and haven't looked back since. From the beginning, I've known what I wanted to do in 9-book series, and it's still on track. So I'm happy to say 2 books out, 1 book coming. The first book was called The Last Sun. The second book was The Hanged Man, and the third book, which hopefully will come up by the end of the year, is called The Hourglass Throne.
Okay.
That is me.
And end of the calendar year, sometime in December, maybe.
I hope so. I really do.
Yeah.
It's really, when you work with a publishing, if I was self-published, I could put it out tomorrow, but
Right.
I'm working through a traditional publishing house, and they work on cycles of like a year and 2 years. And to be honest, both the pandemic and politics in America for the last couple of years have been rough. It's really been a rough place. And you'll hear a lot of writers say they lost their focus along the way. And for the first year I stumbled, recovered. And for me, actually, the pandemic side of it turned out to be an opportunity I worked from home the entire time, and I'm going to continue
Right.
working from home from now on, which is a huge
Wow.
achievement. And it means there's more time to write, because when you start eliminating the commute to work, the commute home, the time you take to get somewhere to have lunch, so that maybe you can capture 10 minutes of writing, I can now write for 60 minutes a day, minimum, guaranteed. So the pandemic really helped me get this book out. I'm very proud of it. 9 novels separated into 3 trilogies. So this is the climax of the first trilogy. It's a big one. It's a very big one in the series. And then I already know what happens next, and I can get a little bit lighter in my next novel, but book 3 is going to be the first really big one for a while.
Wow, that's wonderful. I had listed found family on the list of things to talk to you about, but so had we had another question that came in that was building on the LGBTQ plus language. Have you seen yourself over, as you say, political situation in this world has changed very quickly in the outside world these last couple of years. But so has the language of gender and sexuality. Speaking as somebody who's in a high school every day, the difference between how we talk about gender and sexuality today and even 2 years ago is incredible. One of the questions that came from a Discord member was, do you see yourself becoming even more specific, more diverse in how you portray your characters?
If that's from the Discord crowd, that's a softball question, because they know they've taught me. I know I have. I just know I have. I have grown. Like, I thought when I started, hey, I've got all these gay white men, so aren't I diverse? And it turns out no. After the first book, people would say, I loved your book, but there's more to the gay experience than the gay experience, the gay white male experience. There's more diversity to that. There are people of color. There's more gender in it. There's more to the spectrum. And when I started digging into that, I started realizing that modern language, labels, the concept of labels, it gets a really bad rap. Labels actually can be very helpful. It's like a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a label is worth 1,000 words. And it really helps quickly describe an entire life, someone's life, the way they go about and interact with the world. And I've learned more about myself, whereas I consider myself a gay man. You have this concept of gray asexuality, gray ace. And I found that something about that, which really explains more about who I am as a person now. I've been single pretty much my entire life. It's a state I feel very comfortable in. I'm a very insular person. I live in my head. I've got worlds in my head, and it keeps me busy, and I'm happy with it. And I love the people around me as well. But the more I learned about my readers, they taught me about myself. So I've experienced learning more about the transgender experience through a character I'm bringing into it. I've learned more about asexuality through myself and a character. Demisexuality, the concept that you really need a safe harbor with someone before you can even begin to trust them romantically or intimately. Realizing that's Rune. I mean, that literally describes his experience. And it's made my writing so much stronger and made it accessible to so many more people. But of the two of those, gender and sexuality, gender, I think, is the thing that's been my most profound evolution. I just even commented on that yesterday. I put a deleted scene in from the first draft of the first book, an entire subplot which no longer exists. It's completely nothing to do with the writing that you see now. But as I posted it, and I posted it because of one angle to show the dynamic between Rune and Bran. But as I read through it, I noticed, I was talking about a generic scion as like the average rich person. And I said he. Well, why would I say he? Why would I use a specific pronoun like that instead of saying they, when gender meant no difference? And someone said that, what about that girl, Lily Rose? And I'm like, girl? Did I actually call a woman a girl in my writing? And even today, I was playing Mass Effect 2, the Legendary Edition. Just came out 10 years ago, this massive juggernaut of a game, beautiful, beautiful game. And they have this romance option where your administrative assistant says, she's talking about a trust fall. And the dialogue options are, I'll let you drop, I'll catch you, or no, I'll embrace you. No, that's not okay. You don't do that. He's a captain of his ship, and that's his administrative assistant. That's sexual harassment. So
right.
I things like that just jump at me now, where before it sadly just wasn't a part of my early experience. And I'm hoping that I can try to make the world a little bit of a better place from my understanding, and at the very least to hold games or authors or television shows accountable when they fail and stuff like this. But yes, I've grown a lot through writing this. I've learned a lot, and I hope I hope it was reflected in book 2, and it's certainly going to keep on reflected in book 3 and onwards.
I would suggest that you see the early evolution of that in book 1. So
I hope so.
Despite the growth that we all have as we go forward, there's a difference between not knowing something and continuing to not know it. And so I just,
yeah. And I try to have my characters, or I always pick one character to go through my journey. So there's a character called Lane who I, I'll constantly tend to misgender Lane as she, even though in the first book he was a he, but Lane prefers to go by they now. And for me, accepting, the concept of pronouns and evolving with it and making sure that I'm being really diligent about the use, that's part of my growth as well. And I mimic that with Corinne, who's been the caretaker for Lane. So I can put a bit of myself in that journey. The character Quinn, his journey is being Ace. I'm going to be able to share my experiences on his journey as well. And even what you said, like through the missteps I'd made in book one, Brand is making some of them in the next couple of books with Corinne, treating her as maybe not quite his equal, and then dealing with the gender dynamic there and having Brand learn as well. So I do try to not just learn, but find a way to put that learning in my books if I can, because I think it's important to share that with people.
Well, so this is sideways, but connected, I think. Another evolution that seems to take place. I love unreliable narrators. And so, there's the Agatha Christie and the unreliable narratives of the world. But it's the same reason I love first person, because they're by definition a little bit unreliable, because we know a lot about ourselves, but we don't know everything about ourselves. And so I rereading the first book recently so that I'd be ready for this. It's probably the third time I've read it. I was, I'm used to Rune being the end of the second book, and seeing, and the way he describes himself is very cold and, businesslike, and he only trusts a few people. And yet to see how quickly others do trust him or reach out to him has been interesting. So I wonder how you made decisions, if you did, around narration and character from the beginning, and have those choices proven out for you? Or have you thought about doing something different?
That's a really good question. And yes, it's not just, well, first of all, Rune traditionally is an unreliable narrator on not obviously on some things, like he doesn't understand his own emotions, not whereas people around him do, but specifically there's one thing he's very unreliable about. He's very cagey when it comes to what happened the night that his court fell, and that's going to be exposed in book 3. That all comes out. I'm not going to be fish hooking that as a plot device for the entire series. It comes out in book 3. But as for the change in like the darkness in book 1 compared to book 2 and where it's going, which it definitely lightens up as the family grows. It's hard to have a lot of darkness around when there's like a 6-year-old running around with a, chasing a dinosaur across the lawn. You have to be there. But I think when I first started out, this book was my darkness. It was me. It was very dark. The first book gets very explicit at times, including of what happened to Rune the night he was tortured and abused, including sexually assaulted. And as his family grew and as he brought more people in his life, I found myself unwilling to torment Rune any longer. I found myself unable to continue that dark thread because everyone around him was making the situation so less bleak, making it so much happier. And he was dependent on it, and he realized, I don't have time to learn. I've got to now be the one who has the information so I can act and protect my people. And that was part of my journey as well. But switching the tone of the novel from as dark as it was in book 1, that's also the readers. That's also what I got from what the readers were responding to and what they saw and what they took from it. And I found that there was more value in giving readers lightness than there was darkness. That's the best way of putting it. It was more joyful to do. It created a bigger sense of community. It created a sense of love of the characters. There's always going to be dark elements to my story, and the tough things are going to happen in any epic novel. Not every character is going to make it to the finish line, but I really found that you can still have a tight, loving family surviving traumatic situations without being so morose and dark and challenging the reader with that darkness all the time.
Yeah. Well, let's throw you some easy, concrete questions. One that came to me before this talk opened up was, did you have a in any of the books, like, is there a thing that's the hardest thing for you to do? Or was there a particularly hard moment or chapter or something to write? And was there a particular joyful moment where you just wanted it to last forever?
One of the hardest moments is book 3. It's inevitable at some point that Rune will have a loss, and that a character might be lost. So it's not as much a secret. People do know I've talked about losing a character in book 3. So I try to be I don't want to commit to more than that, but that was tough to lose someone from your story that's been in your head for 10 years and probably is going to be really your day-to-day life for another 5 years or more. It's really strange to let go of someone like that. So that was the toughest thing I've done. It still is. And it's not even over because it's going to be tough writing the next book.
Right.
But I think the most joyous was the epilogue of book 2. I'd always kind of envisioned the epilogue as a full-size chapter, and it's a little bit arrogant to do that because you assume that the reader wants to spend time with you after the novel's essentially over. And I found that in book 1, people did follow me into the epilogue, and that was actually a really nice way to see the characters post danger, to see them
Yeah.
coming back together and to see a lot of love and character development and tying up some of those character arcs, not necessarily novel or story arcs. And in book 2, I went all out on that. And I think the one thing I hear over and over in book 2 is people talking about the epilogue, that it really left the novel, that they really thought it was a beautiful way to end the novel. It was strong. It set up a storyline for the future without feeling like a cliffhanger. So that was a point when I started realizing that my novel had expanded beyond my expectations. The response to
Mhm.
that showed me that it was bigger than I thought it was. And so that was a very powerful moment for me as a writer.
That's a good one. Well, we just had a question come in from the unreliable narrator question. We've seen it with some of the scenes from the holiday and scenes from the quarantine. Are there any plans for other narrators or points of views from characters other than Rune?
Oh yes, I hope so. This is an ongoing struggle right now because in the final stages. I'm about to finish my final read through of the 3rd book, meaning I'll never read through it from beginning to end again with the idea of editing it. And one of the things that's a reality right now in publishing is that there's a paper shortage. It's real. It affects their ability. It's expensive to add pages to a novel. And I had wanted book 3 to be 100 pages longer than it was because there was an entire subplot from different characters' points of view. Quinn, Max, Ciaran, and Anna, 4 characters. And it just had to get cut. It still happens, but it's off page. It's because Rune's not there. It's not through his perspective, obviously. They're somewhere else for those parts. And I'm going to still write it, I think, as a standalone novella, a companion novella, as I'm going to write. So after Hourglass Throne comes out, I might release that separately, like a month later or 2 months later. I think I have to because I just enjoyed that subplot so much. And the chance of writing through a different character's perspective is I've got to start doing that because I do have plans to spin off the series into, for instance, a Magnus Academy series, my young adult magical boarding school series. I've always wanted to write something like that. And here I have characters in a magical boarding school and they're young. So I'm going to take them and spin them off into a different series. And that won't be through Rune's point of view. It'll be through theirs. So I really want to start laying the groundwork for that right now. And in some of the holiday stories I experimented. And one story was Ciaran's point of view. And he's my most flamboyant character. And I had so much fun doing that. I cannot imagine not doing that again in the future. It just was too much fun. It was probably if you're asking for writing joys, writing that short story from Ciaran's perspective was another one of my high points. I absolutely was thrilled to do.
Well, a question came in too around Queenie. Are we ever going to know a little bit more or hear from her?
I know, it's like she's been there forever.
Mm.
You'll learn more about Queenie. Some people, well, there's always a method to my madness. Let's say that. How about that?
Yeah.
Any character who's quiet is probably worth keeping an eye on.
All right. Do you have, this is related to another form of your book, but the audio narration, do you have, how involved are you in the arrangements around audio? And have you listened to them?
I haven't really talked much about the recent developments with that, but it's one of the things that I've realized is I'm learning a lot more about the publishing industry and what each component of it brings to your, let's say, series, my series. Okay. So my publishing house, Pyre, they get my books in bookstores. You know, that's number one purpose of them is they get my book. So if you go into a Barnes and Noble, you'll see my book on the shelf. A traditional publishing house can do that for you. But I also have another contract with Audible, and I've got to say what you will about Amazon, but they've really been a fantastic partner. They get my books in people's hands. They're good about promoting it. I mean, I'm really, and also the quality of the production is great, and they got Josh Hurley to do the narration. And no, I don't often listen all the way through because I don't want to hear I want to hear my character voices in my head. But however, I was involved, like they gave you some audition tapes in the beginning and you pick the one you like, and they use your input, but they're going to make all the decisions ultimately in the end. But Josh Hurley is amazing. He is, I just cannot speak more highly of him as a narrator. Whenever I see like I would say 1 out of every 3 compliment I see on Goodreads or Barnes and Noble, whatever it might, or Amazon, is talking about Josh's narration, his Audible narration. It's demonstrated to me that Audible is rising a lot as a preferred delivery method for reading. That you've got to take that into account. And I am definitely in the future going to be exploring more relationships with maybe doing an exclusive with Audible, you know, for something that I sell. Maybe, for instance, the novella I want to do, the companion novella. My publishing house can't afford that extra 100 pages, but if I do a standalone, maybe I can get an exclusive deal with Amazon and still get Josh Hurley to do an Audible narration. So I'm trying to be a little bit savvier about how I look into those things. I feel like I didn't answer the whole question. Did I miss part of it?
No, you did. Yeah, it was really just, how involved are you and is any author with the Audible and I mean the audio?
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
definitely trying to explore other, and also the things that I've already done. I started off doing this free content between the novels, and it
mhm,
really kind of spiraled in the best way possible because
yeah,
um, A, it's built my reading audience during this huge desert between publication dates.
right.
And also it got me through the pandemic. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I did scenes from quarantine in the beginning as a way just to get me through day to day because I was terrified as a human being.
Yeah.
And I was able to put my characters through that as well. And then it evolved into something so much more. And that
Mhm.
was that was a very special project. But so now I've got a novella, The Sunken Mall. I've got these 2 collections of scenes and short stories. And I'm thinking I'd love to package those as well for Audible. I'd love to hear those narrated by
Yeah.
Josh Hurley. So I'm trying to explore other possible avenues there, but I am getting a little bit savvier about those things. And hopefully you'll also see you will see a much expedited rate of writing for me.
Well, so a connected question is, and given, along the lines of what gets you through, you mentioned a writing group. Are you still in the
I
same writing group? Like, how does that all work for you?
I I I tell everyone, you know, if you want to be a writer and you're not in a writing group, you should really think twice. And you might not find the right writing group the first time out because there are dozens of different formats. And trust me, out of the dozen formats that I experienced with, I only found one that worked well, and it's the writing group I'm in now, and I've been in it since the year before I signed a contract on Last Sun. So they've been there the entire time. Some people come and go, but the core group has remained. 3 of us are published writers. 3 of us are hopefully soon to be published writers because all of us, I think, have been doing a really good job. You can't, you have no idea how valuable that is to have people familiar with your work who, in just reading a 3,000 word chunk, knows the entire context of your novel, so they can still give you really targeted good input. They give you motivation. They give you that cheerleading you need. I'm a huge fan of writing groups, but I really do have to explicitly say you've got to find a format that works for you. I've met too many people go to a writing group and they're lucky if they get feedback on 3,000 words once every 6 months because the group is so big and they only do like 2 or 3 pieces a night. That never worked for me. That's not helping me grow fast enough. The writing group I'm in, every single meeting, once every other week, you can bring stuff, 3,000 words every time, and we get feedback on it. We're a small group, usually between 5 and 8 people at the very most. So it's something I'm a big proponent of.
Do you meet in person or is it virtual pretty much?
It's been virtual since the pandemic. to be honest, I found that I like virtual a lot with everything. So
Yeah.
I'm finding a very difficult time going back to the idea of giving up an hour to commute somewhere. Even though I do love sitting down with these people, we go on, retreats if we're able to work out the details. These are people who will do social events with. So it's it's been virtual for now, but
Okay. Well, why don't we see if you would be willing to read the first page of the Hourglass Firm? We would be thrilled, and I suspect there are people watching. I know we're recording this, and they've been putting it up on the main monitor. And so for people who maybe haven't read something, just to hear your voice and writing style, we would love that.
You know what? Okay, I'll read the first page. Part of the other thing I was thinking about reading was the one. I'm going on a tangent here, but I still feel
Do it.
the one decision that I didn't agree with on my publisher with, but I let them have their way because they were so kind about everything else. They really gave me what I wanted, was they didn't put a prologue in the first book. And I did finally convince them to put the prologue in the second book, but that prologue to this day, I think needed to be in the first book. It was the first 2 pages I wrote that described the world in the framework for it, what the Arcana was, what Atlantis was, the timeline for when it revealed itself to the world. And I think without that, it was really hard in the first book to understand the world. It took a long time. I think it was alien. I threw readers right into it without a safety net. So sometimes I'll read those first 2 pages because it was the first 2 pages I've done. But I know in this case, if there are people who actually know my writing, they haven't read this stuff yet because, well, it's the first page of book 3, which hasn't been out yet.
Great.
Let's see. Okay. I'm a really bad reader and I hate the sound of my voice, so forgive me.
No,
And
it's okay.
I don't do good voices either, but and pardon the language because Brand swears and I can't get away with that because it's literally the first word of the page. All 3 books I've started mid-sentence because when I started writing, I was staring at the first page and I'm saying, whatever, I'm just gonna start, someone's in the middle of saying a sentence. And so every novel I've started in the middle of a sentence just to show that, forget all the pressure about what the first sentence is. But the first sentence here is "I can cut you," dropping the F, but "I can cut you!" exclamation point. And that's Brand. I slapped Brand's hand away from the radio dial and swerved back into my lane. Why do you always jump to cutting? I demanded. Use your words if you don't like the radio station I picked. Since the pop song was off and he got his way, Brand settled into the passenger seat with a smirk. I was driving our beat up old Saturn towards a corner of the city, almost exactly due south of Sun Estate. While summer brought the earliest sunrises of the year to New Atlantis, we were still a half hour shy of one. Or we're still half hour shy of one. The air around us was gray tinged black of pre-dawn. Nothing short of an emergency would have normally got me out of bed before sunrise, let alone 2 hours before it, which is when Lady Priestess had called in with an urgent request. All I knew was that an unknown barrier had appeared around the Rejuvenation Center, and they couldn't reach anyone inside by phone or text. I'd given myself 30 minutes to add a few stealth and infiltration spells to my sigils at her vague recommendation, while an even grumpier Brand went from room to room assembling his leathers and chest harness. It takes so much longer to get out the door now, he yawned. I miss Half House. No, you don't. You've got dozens of people to boss around now. No, I've got dozens of people who need to be bossed around because their heads haven't grown out of their ass yet, which is a state they need to be in to do what they should be doing without being told. Why didn't Lady Priestess tell you any more about what to expect? Were there any background noises? What sort of noises did you expect me to hear? I don't know, he said. Scions clutching their pearls angst, man being eaten by crocodile screams. We usually know more before we take a job. Well, good thing it's not a job then. Can you hand me my coffee? I waited a beat, but no coffee edged into my peripheral. As street lamps sliced blades of yellow across the windshield, I gave him a quick look. What? This isn't a job, he asked. No, it's a favor. I guess that's the sort of thing Arcana do for each other. So we're not getting paid, he asked louder now. Is this the sort of thing we can look forward to now that you're part of the Arcana? And that's the end of the first page. But
Oh.
I will essentially tell you it starts right away with a massive 2-chapter opening action sequence. I always have what I call an opening action sequence. And this one takes place at a rejuvenation center where a mysterious barrier has appeared around it. and it actually does connect with the rest of the story. A lot of times my opening sequence is something a little bit different and not actually part of the plot of the main novel, but this jumps right into the overall history. Very happy with the first two chapters. I've been waiting to write those for years. This sort of spooky, like, what's going on inside this place that should have people in it, and everyone should be moving in and out of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. We got some thumbs up as you were reading, so thank you. And I know you don't love that, but I can tell you don't love that, but it was really great. Thank you. We have a lot, not a lot, but a few questions that are really concrete, and you should absolutely feel free to say no, or you got to wait for that, or whatever it might be. In particular, we're interested in sigils, and we know it's a lost art. Do you think at some point will that art be rediscovered and there'll be some new sigils? Like, what do you want to tell us about any of those things?
It's on
Maybe
there.
nothing.
Yes, it is part of. How about this? Every now and then you'll say something, and I'll simply say it's part of the 9-novel arc. It is part of the 9-novel arc, and it will be a very important part of the arc.
Okay, excellent.
No one's asked me that before, by the way. That's the first question I've got where I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I like that. Good.
One of the questions, so here's a question you can answer. We wanted to know a little bit more about what a number of us found a fascinating way of building the world building of this new Atlantis involved taking old buildings from the rest of the world to use. Like, tell us about that. That is, we love that. And are there buildings you have in mind you haven't quite found a use for yet, but it's going to come up, or whatever you want to tell us?
I've always loved ruins, any sort of ruins, ancient ruins, or even like modern ones of like the abandoned psychiatric hospital from 20 years ago. The writer in me just like screams when I see stuff like that. But I think honestly, it came from, we all had those 15-minute breaks at work where you're just like jumping from one text to the next, and you go online and you surf like Reddit or whatever. In Reddit and places like that, they always have chains on urban ruins. They always seem to have lists on it, like famous ruins or urban exploration or whatever you might be. You end up on this list of 10 items. And the next thing you know, I found every time I clicked on those, it was like a rabbit hole. It wasn't, I can't go on to the next one because I wanted to research what I was looking in front of me because it was so interesting. The next thing you know, I became like a mild expert on researching ruins and finding a way to import them into my story. And just the idea that they could do this overnight, they could take they're resettling the island of Nantucket, which is off of Cape Cod, where I used to live. The Vineyard and Nantucket are two islands, and it's more of like what you'd imagine an island off of Cape Cod. It's a lot of beach property and maybe the size of Manhattan thereabouts. But I imagine what happened if you just took the land itself and brought in buildings from all across the world and were able to magically rehabilitate the buildings to their original format, but at the same time still remaining. I talk about how magic is fuel, and one of the places they can get fuel are in ruins because it's imprinted with a lot of human emotions, centuries of human emotions. And so take all those buildings, which is a source of magic, and overnight create this Gotham with this beautiful architecture, none of which matches. It just looks completely surreal. And just imagining that that's something I'd like to look at. I'd like to see what that looks like.
All right. Here is kind of a open-ended big one. Tell us about your storytelling heroes. I mean, I said storytelling instead of writing because maybe it's a different format, but kind of who are you reading now? Who have you read? Who had an impact on you as a person or a writer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of appropriate for me too, because one of the things the pandemic did is it killed my ability to read. I'm recovering it now, but for a year, I found myself watching TV instead of reading. And not just watching any TV, but I went through my queue within, the first few weeks of the pandemic, like everyone else. And then you wonder what's next. And for me, it was international television. And I really, watching international sci-fi in particular, that's a storytelling medium that I like a lot. So there are shows out now. I just talked about one last night, Motherland, Port Salem. It's this show on Freeform about, I can't even barely begin to describe it because it's the world building is so massive and creative an alien. It's a world like ours, but witches are in it, and they've been there since the time of Salem. It's like our world, and they're the soldiers. The witches are the soldiers against the enemies that are attacking humans and witches. But it's 90% cast with strong, competent women. It's diverse, racial diversity in the casting, huge LGBT plus storyline. Just like every box I wanted it to tick, it ticked, and it's just gorgeous world building, gorgeous, complicated, deep, really well thought out, and that for me is almost like a novel, an entire season of TV that is so sound. It wraps together so perfectly. That's a show I would highly recommend. As for actual writers, I don't. Kelly Armstrong is one of my favorite writers. She always has been. She's always dabbled in urban fantasy, but she does a million other things as well. And she has one of the most natural writing styles in the world. You could read an entire chapter and you could look back and say, well, that didn't seem too difficult to write that, but it really is. It's deceptively easy to write. She just has this beautiful way of carrying you through the narration, even if the characters are doing something as mundane as eating a peanut butter sandwich. So I'm kind of addicted to her. I'm reading through her latest, I think it's called the Casey Duncan series, sort of a refugee community set up in the wilds of Alaska, people who need to drop off the grid for a while. A little bit almost vaguely sci-fi in a way. Those are
I
two.
read that. It reminded me of like Three Pines, or not Three Pines, The Pines, and
Yes.
it's like a missing village. That's great. Like, and we do hear from people. I don't know that there's anybody that didn't have their story input changed by the pandemic.
It really, I mean, how do you even begin to describe this experience that we all went through? Everyone in the world went through this. We all went through this. We don't even know what the fallout of this is going to be yet. It's staggering. It's a form of trauma. I mean, really. I mean, there were some good things that some people found. They redid their love of their family. They spent a year, living on top of each other, and it was a good thing. And there's some people that are ready to get out of the house. For me, it was a good thing because I realized I really like working from home, but it was also scary and frightening, and we didn't know what it meant for the rest of the world. And we're all in this together. It's interesting to see how that is panning out on everything. It leaves its fingerprints on everything.
Yeah, it's the end of the school year. I'm a principal in a big high school here, and we were talking the other day about what we will keep, what we want to bury forever, kind of thing. And one of the things that a number of us said, including me, is that we spent more time outside than we had in years. And it was in my yard. Like, I didn't go far, but just taking your shoes off and feeling the ground underneath your feet, connecting you to the world. But the other memory I have that I don't know that I've ever told anybody this, but the day before we all closed schools for 16 months, but didn't know it. So it was the Friday before. I went to get a student whose mother had just tested positive, and it was the first positive case any of us knew of in person. And I took this big, strong, athletic upperclassman boy, and I said, we're gonna go meet your dad, and he's gonna pick you up. And he started crying, and he said, "Is she gonna die?"
Yeah.
Like, we didn't know. Like, nobody knew. I know.
Speaking of that.
Yeah. So, we held hands like down the stairwell. And then I couldn't shake anybody's hand for 16 months. So that was, odd. Yeah, it's been quite a time. I was going to ask you a little bit of question about, and I think maybe those who are listening might be able to chip in as well. Were there sort of literary or storytelling moments? You just shared one around Motherland that's on Freeform, and that made a difference to you over this time, and that kind of came out of this time. So for me, I will offer that I tuned into LeVar Burton reading adult stories every Friday night, like live, and it was like a anchor in my week. Like, I knew at 7 o'clock on Friday, that's what I would be doing. I didn't always like the story. I didn't always know the story, but it like gave me some structure. And I think we all know Jim Krasinski, or, what's his name? Krasinski, who did the Good News with his daughters that we all loved, right? So, I mean, I would love if we kept doing that, but, anybody, but including you, Katie, is there were there moments, things that only came out of that time
Yeah,
that you'll remember?
or the things that like kept me sane, that helped me get through it. Me writing my scenes from quarantine and having my readers follow it as well, that was huge. That got me through the beginning of the pandemic until things got a little bit less scary.
Right.
Also, it's actually kind of it's something I feel awful about too. At the same time, there's this writer, Julie Trineda. She writes. She's been writing sci-fi and fantasy for a long time, and she writes a series called The Web Shifters. And Essen is a shape-shifting alien that's lived for many, 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 many years. And I adore this series. It's beautiful sci-fi, elegant. It's smart because Julie Trineda is incredibly smart when it comes to things like marine biology and biology, so that she's able to take that knowledge and apply it to other worlds in just fascinating ways. But the found family element is huge. Paul and Essen are amongst the best found family couple I found. And Julie had asked if I would write a blurb for her new book, and I ended up not doing it because I didn't want to read through what I had, like to get to that point, because I was reading every Sunday. I would pull out that book and I'd read like a little bit of it or a chapter. And there's something about that series which grounded me and it got me through Sunday so I could face Monday. And I still, to this point, like I tell Julie, I can't rush through this because I don't want this to end. This is one of my favorite series, and it's been everything. We all needed something like that. What was our touchstone to even get us out of bed the next day when things were really bad? And that was for me, the Web Shifters book by Julie Trineda.
Web Shifters book. I wrote her name down.
It's like
for people that are watching.
It's funny, and she's so smart that when she tells a joke in the book, it's always so wry and just smart. It's smart humor. And also she's very good at the unreliable narrator, in the sense of Essen doesn't realize when Essen is particularly acting essence. I say it's he, sometimes it's she, Essen's a she. Essen doesn't realize when Essen's doing something ridiculously silly. So that Julie's good at signaling to the reader, you know what's going on. Essen doesn't. So it's like two layers of reactions. And she's just a really accomplished writer. I've learned a lot from her about subtlety. I think was my most, like, subtlety in my humor, which my humor tends to be much more direct dialogue based in your face. But she taught me that narration could be humorous as well.
So I think that the next big category of questions, and they all sort of related, and I think and I suspect you've talked about this before, is around social media and how you interact and how any author interacts with fans. And do you have advice for people on interacting with authors or interacting with you, and and vice versa? When does that work best? And
I'm learning about that. Like interacting with other authors and interacting with readers, those are two separate things for me. Readers, I've one thing I found, my experience isn't necessarily everyone's experience. I just don't think it is. My readers are kind and supportive. They make my social media a really safe place. And you don't hear many people say that. They go on Twitter to feel safe. I go on Twitter to feel safe. I follow people who follow me and people who love writing and reading and TV shows. And something about the way I curated that list and something about the type of people who read my books, it's just been really positive. It's just really just kind. I mean, like we talked about the Discord people, those readers who get together on Discord and they talk about my books and other things. They're so supportive of each other. It makes such a difference in the world. It's just nice and it's kind. So my social media I'm encouraged to interact with them because they're worth interacting with. They make my life better. They make me positive. They give me motivation. They make me want to write on a daily basis. I haven't gone on much else. Like, I'm gonna start branching onto Instagram and TikTok, I think, because I do have a merchandise store. And the merchandise store is filled with artwork by readers. It's all reader artwork, and they get a portion of the sales, and it goes on to one of those sites that can put it on the artwork on t-shirts or mugs or whatever you decide to pick. And they're trying to get me to go expand my social media presence for that. And I might do it, but Twitter's the way I really reach out to people. As for interacting with other authors, that's the tough one for me. I don't know. Some of them are really like you reach out to and they give you feedback and support, and then others, it feels like you're breaking into a clique. It feels like they've known each other for a long time. They are storied writers, and I just don't. It's so awkward for me. I'm still at that fanboy stage. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to be doing at least 2, if not 3 or 4 cons this year, and getting out there a little bit more and meeting readers and speaking on panels. But that's the one thing that always makes me a little bit nervous, is meeting my peers.
Gotcha. Well, we're coming up on 50 minutes, which I find, as much as I like the virtual world as well, that's a long time to be talking. I don't know if anybody else in using the chat wants to throw out a question, or if there's anything that I didn't ask you that you would love to share with us.
Yes,
Otherwise, go ahead.
you asked really good questions. Those are a few questions that I haven't been asked before, and I've been asked a lot of questions over the last 2 years now. So thank you.
You're welcome. The last question I had is a little bit related to that, and the last question around interacting with fans. I feel like we those of us who have done a Myers-Briggs test, or even not, we know that we are either primarily an introvert or primarily an extrovert, and that's different than loving to be around people. You clearly are talking about how you love interacting in this virtual way, and yet,
but I'm not an extrovert.
No, on the other hand, like, by some definitions you are, because you're getting some energy from the fan base, from connecting online, writers group, and you will meet writers who don't, like, they are.
It's funny how I would. You are right. You're absolutely right, and you're actually kind of challenging the way I look at the concept myself. But if you'd ask me, I do not feel I'm not one of those people who can march into a room and be like, "I'm here, come shake my hand, tell me your life story." It happens more subtly.
Yeah, but when we reached out to authors around, Julie York, who's running this whole thing with the wonderful people who are also in this group right now, you responded right away. Where some writers, they wait, not because they're not sure, but because they're not sure they're going to like it or be able to do it. And you sat right down and were ready to answer whatever came up. So
yeah, I also have a debate background. I did debate in high school, and I was really pretty good at it. I went to like championships and grand nationals, and it made me feel very comfortable in front of people. And when I think a lot of you writers out there will have experiences too, your ability to write has influenced many parts of your life from the beginning, not the least of which is speaking to people, writing emails, even doing something like giving eulogies at funerals. And you've received feedback on that, and it's made you feel, it does give you a bit more confidence when you're speaking to crowds, because one way or the other, that writing ability has been at work in your life all along, not just in your writing. So I do like this. I love answering. I love my world. I love the characters I created. I love my readers. I love the questions they ask. I can't think of any other thing I would want to do more than talk about something like this for an hour. So and you guys were, and also it's Maine. So it's Maine. Yeah. Of course, I'm going to do stuff with you guys. Maine is, it has a very, I talked about novels that I've written before that aren't going to be published, and some of them were set in Maine. So I'm sure you'll see Maine in the future in my books, one way or the other.
Great.
But I love to see what you put out in the world too. If people are asking you to prepare somewhere, I mean, that's humbling. It's a compliment. So why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? So, and it helps me grow more.
Yeah, and it was one of the things that I think got some of us through this winter, was looking forward to the spring, and knowing that authors like you were willing to come made a difference to many of us. So thank you.
Always. Don't hesitate. Would love to do it again.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great rest of your weekend. Yeah.
Yes, you all as well. Good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you.